What's up, guys? This is second period on Wednesday the 11th. It is Veterans Day, I believe, and this video is not going to be long. I want to go over some general things that you can do if you are stuck, if you are having a problem, and then I will answer any questions if we have any in the chat. Also, maybe if I show some stuff, I can put links in the description or in the Google Classroom post that people can use. So let's see here. On our Classroom page, we got this video right here. You can watch it later. It's on the playlist, all that good stuff. This was yesterday, and I was talking about the general plan. And I did post 2 assignments, which are not new. It's stuff you knew about all along. It's just the next step. So this one says finish the tutorial, which means go through the steps and end up with something like the basic template where it says example, welcome, questions, etc. And that's it. I want you to kind of lock in that basic structure that works before you start messing with it. Of course, the final step is to mess with it and change it up to make it unique. But the idea is that you should always be getting something that works and then evolving from there. You know, if you think of like evolution in real life, each organism in each generation has to live, and then the next one can be a little different. But it's not like you can just have a bad version for a while that ends up working 1,000 years later. It has to work at every step. And with your page, it should like change one thing, see if it works. Change one thing, see if it works. And that's actually my first tip, is when you're on, this is my example and it doesn't really make sense because I was messing with it. But if you change something, you should hit run all the time. You should be hitting run like every 90 seconds just to see if your thing works. Does it do what you want it to do? Does it give you an error? Does it give you no change when you thought there would be a change? So for example, I'm looking at the JavaScript, so let's change something on the JavaScript. And this function draw is the thing that like brings up the page in the first place with the background. So if trivia state equals welcome, then it's going to make the background yellow. That is the first thing that shows, so we won't have to click through a lot to see it. So let's change this and make it say blue. Okay, I'm going to hit run, and look at that, it's blue. If you notice, it was gray for a second and then it changed, which is kind of interesting. There might be some something to learn in terms of like what order things run. Like it fires up the page and then it changes it half a second later. That might be kind of interesting to know. But anyway, the idea is that every time you change something, hit run. Okay, that's my #1 tip. Not just for this, but for every project. My computer science 2 is doing a different project in a different language, but some of those guys are having problems because they change a lot and then they test it and oh, it doesn't work. But I'm telling them to like slow down, change one thing, hit run, change one thing, hit run, see what happens, and don't get too far astray, because if it doesn't work, then you might have to go back several steps. It's like in a video game, if you get far away from a checkpoint and then you die, you'd have to go all the way back to the checkpoint and do multiple things. That's always more time, more work, more confusion. By the way, let's see what happens if you put something in here that isn't a color. Like let's say blue with like not a real blue. I bet it'll stay gray. Oh, look at that. It's just completely white, so it doesn't give it a color at all. And that's another thing to note. If you put a word that doesn't really work as a keyword, or if you do a typo or something and you hit run, you would notice right away, oh, whoa, that's not it. And then you would have to, I'm going to change this back to yellow. But that's my #1 tip. My first thing is to hit run. all the time, every time you change one line, one character, one function. Really want to be constantly testing to make sure it works. You might get an error. You can't see it because of the webcam window, but in the bottom right there's the little console with potential errors that might show up. There's also the preview window in the top right here where you'll see what happens, and sometimes it'll do what you want, sometimes it won't do anything at all, sometimes it'll do the previous version and it ended up not changing. That's number one. Okay, another thing is, if you are going to change a lot, if you're going to kind of go out there a few steps and like change a big thing, you're like, oh, I'm going to make it use a totally different function to maybe add a new way of transitioning from one screen to another, or it's going to branch off in different directions. If you get it wrong, it gives you like an easier question. If you get it right, it gives you a harder one. It's like you're going to change some big system. Then here's what I recommend is you do a fork. Okay, you go up to the top here and you hit fork, which means it's going to make a copy, and so you can go in a new direction in the copy while the original stays there, or maybe your group members will still be working on it and it'll, you know, evolve in its own way. But that fork is extremely useful. It's meant for other people's projects, like if you open somebody else's thing and you make a copy and take it in your own direction. That's sort of the original idea, but fork is extremely crucial for doing it with your own projects. If you say, okay, I'm going to make one version that's just following the plan, going, you know, according to small changes, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to make one where I go, what would happen if I add a video? Or what would happen if I completely rearrange this function to give you, for example, this thing has questions that are randomly chosen. If you play the game, it does them in a different order every time. And one group was thinking, well, what if we want to do questions that go in order, that are like, the first one is supposed to be first, and the second one is supposed to be second. And that's a big change, and that would very likely mess up other parts if you mess with it. So what they should do is fork, try that on its own path, but then keep the original so they can have that base to start with. I'm looking at the chat. If I see anything, I'll answer a question. Or if you tell me it's wrong, like I had one class tell me, hey, your mic is not working. And I was just speaking with zero volume. So that's one thing. General tips. Run all the time, and if you're going to make a big change, use fork. This is kind of like a Google Doc where you can go to version history and go back to, you know, previous changes and stuff. But that's useful for small things. If you're going to do a big thing, fork for sure. What it does is it gives you a new file with just a 1 or a 2 or something. Like when you make a duplicate file in Windows, it saves it as like, you know, download 1 or download 2 or something. And that's a little dangerous if you have a bunch and you don't remember which is which. So you might do the thing of putting comments at the top. In JavaScript, you go //. But you could also change the title of it itself. Once it makes that version, you could say, oh, well, I'm gonna call this like trivia non-random, or trivia image background, or trivia image buttons or something. Okay, so another thing I would say is you're not on your own. You're not working from scratch. You know, we started with a template, and when you add other stuff, you can find templates or examples of those things as well. So one way to do that is to just Google it. okay? If you're going to say, hey, I want to put an image in the button. I'm going to say like, you know, my question is going to be, which one of these guys is Mario's brother? And then the pictures, like one is a picture of Kirby and one is a picture of Luigi or something. You might think, hey, can I put a picture in a button, or is it only text? And I would say, I don't know, man. I just thought of this 5 seconds ago. Google it. I'm going to go HTML image in button. And of course, there are some sites that are more reputable than others, and there's some that are newer than others. This is from 2011, so there's always a chance whatever they say doesn't work anymore. But here's one from 2020. And here's one from W3 Schools, which is a very legit sort of library of tags and code and how to use them. So this one says how to button on image. That's the opposite of what I wanted. I want an image on a button. But you know, it might be something. This one uses the div tag, the div HTML, which is in our template a lot. If you look at the HTML, I'm clicking, it's not moving very quick. It uses that to describe the different types of screens. So it's like, oh, there's welcome, there's question, there's thank you. And div is great because it doesn't do anything on its own. Like if you just put this in HTML, it doesn't work differently than if you had the inside stuff. But it classifies them. It says like, hey, this is one chunk. This is one container is the word they use. Like you put it in this container and then you can do stuff with that container. So in the CSS, you can say like, hey, if there's something class screen, then here's how it works. Or if there's something class screen sub question, then, you know, it looks a certain color or whatever. And then, of course, the JavaScript can interact with that as well. Like when it's doing this stuff, that's kind of reaching through those steps as well. This is not exactly what we want. We could do that. You could have pictures and then put buttons on top of them. Although I don't love it. Let's click on this and see what happens. I've never done an image in a button. I don't even know if it's possible. Okay, so this guy is saying you can do it with a different tag that does the same job. It works like a button, it just doesn't use the button tag. And that's probably what it would end up working best. Although, again, this is just me looking at it for like 1 minute, so a longer investigation would figure it out. And then what would happen is you'd try it, and you'd put it in your code and see what happens. And then you might have to end up changing a few other things. If you are using button, then all the stuff you have still fits. But if you end up using an input, by the way, we've used input before, like for the text boxes in Q1. If you put input with no type, text is the default, but you can put type and make it something else that is clickable, or where you can enter text or something like that. Anyway, that's one way, is to just Google it, find some sites, read what people say, and then give it a shot. The other way that I would really recommend is this section of the project page. So if you go to this About page, which is where we started, where you get the tutorial and the example, there is a section called Code Mod Examples. And this is where they say, hey, once you've got it, here's what you can do to individualize your thing. If you want to change the style with CSS, which, by the way, everybody's going to, at least a little bit, right? You're going to make the colors a little bit different, or the text a little bit different. Click here, and it tells you some examples. It gives you a little bit about the colors. It even tells you that there are different ways to do the same thing. A minute ago, we were doing colors with the word, because a lot of colors are like preset. If you say yellow, it knows exactly what you mean. But you can be more precise than that. You can say, well, I want to do slightly different gradients of, they call it RGB, where you give the 3 values of the 3 different primary colors, and then it makes a more fine-grained difference. So you could do that with RGB values. This is the red, green, and blue. Or you could background image. A group asked me about this a week or two ago when we looked up how to make an image in the background. And that works too. Actually, we were doing this in the JavaScript and not in the CSS. But it's really the same thing, since they all wrap around each other and send messages back and forth to each other. So you could click on one of these and get either, you might get like straight up answer of what to do, or you might get inspiration where you think, oh, he's doing this thing, I want to do something slightly different. So this one says true false, and it has to do with different question types. If you go through the template, it has questions that fit 4 choices, and if you don't put that, you might get some weird stuff. You might get buttons that are empty, or you might get an error. This is, hey, we only want 2. Okay, we only want 2 things to show up. We don't want like blank buttons or error buttons for the ones that don't have text. And turns out it's pretty easy. They already pre-built like, hey, we know this is possible, so we're gonna make a quality. If the answer button has the property of empty, then hey, don't display it. You might do this if you're doing true false, like exactly what it says, or you might do this in other situations. If you do something else that involves fewer than 4 choices, then you can use this to make it so that we're not displaying 4 boxes when we don't really need that many. Okay, and this is a good example too, because it's really simple. If you go through some of these mod examples, they might add a big chunk of text, or they might require you to go through and change multiple things. But this one, it's like, yeah, hey, add this 3-line chunk, and then you're done. There's a nice variety in here, and you may very well combine and do more than one. You know, like if you're doing true false, you might make the buttons bigger because you don't have as many. You might have just 2 buttons. You might decide, well, I'm going to make them big, and I'm going to put other stuff, or I'm going to make it like look a different style, or maybe put them next to each other instead of stacked. In that case, you'd go to the CSS one and say, okay, how do I do this? I'm going to use some of this to change the buttons, the borders, whatever. And you might combine 2 of these into one effect that the user will just see, oh, this works, this looks good, because you arrange 2 or 3 things to make it work. So there are things you can do, like adding a button. If you want to make an extra button that is, instead of waiting and then just automatically moving, they could have a next. Or you could change this to let them skip before they even click. Like if they just see one that they don't know, they could have a skip button. Or you could add, once you know how to add a button, you can make it do other things like give a hint. You could add a hint column in your spreadsheet. Probably, I haven't tried it, but get your JavaScript to like pluck out that column if the person asks for it. Or you could make one that says go back, or make one that says you know, return to beginning or something like that. And this is not that hard at all. It just gives you two things. It says find this line and then change this part. But the idea of, hey, we need to add something and give it a function, then once you know that and once you understand that, you can do a whole new world, man. Sound effects. A lot of you guys did sound in Q1, so you're familiar with this. You can use the on-click event when it comes to buttons that we learned in Q1. You can do some scoring stuff, which is kind of fun. The basic version is like, hey, here's what you got on this session. If you want to do a super advanced one, you could say like, oh, we're going to save it and then display high scores from previous visits. That would be really cool, but that would take more time. So the point is, look through these, because these are just people who've done it before, and they know what you're trying, and they give you hints. And you are not just literally copy pasting. You're always going to be adjusting it to fit your idea. So for example, the true false doesn't have to be true false. You could be two other types of, like any other thing that has two choices, or any other thing that has three choices. You'd still use this to get rid of the empty ones. And if you're doing style changes, it doesn't have to be just color and border, but once you get the idea, then you can take it in whatever direction you like. So this video has been about 20 minutes. I'm going to end it here because I don't want to go super long and have nobody even watch it. But I hope this has helped to just go over some general stuff where you are, because most of you are at the point where you've got the tutorial, or you're just finishing up the tutorial and you need to add your own unique stuff. So give those a shot. Thanks.